Are you an Amazon Prime member? Do you have 5 minutes? Then you could support us with $5 a month for free. Head to escapeartists.net/Twitch for a complete walkthrough.
Escape Pod, Episode 963, To Catch a Flieff, by Julia Rios, Part 2 of 2.
Hello and welcome to Escape Pod, your weekly science fiction podcast. I'm Valerie Valdez, your host for this episode. Our story this week is part 2 of To Catch a Flieff by Julia Rios. It originally appeared in Scenes from Elsewhere in 2022. Julia Rios is a queer Latinx writer, editor, podcaster, and narrator whose fiction, nonfiction, and poetry have appeared in Latin American Literature Today, Lightspeed, and Goblin Fruit, among other places. Their editing work has won multiple awards, including the Hugo Award. Julia is a co-host of This Is Why We're Like This, a podcast about the movies we watch in childhood that shape our lives, for better or for worse. They've narrated stories for Escape Pod, Podcastle, Pseudopod, and Cast of Wonders. Find out more at juliarios.com. Our narrators this week are Tatiana Gray and Abra Stafford-Mead. Tatiana Gray is a critically acclaimed actress of stage, screen, and the audio booth. She has been nominated for dozens of fancy awards, but hasn't won a single damned thing. She lives in Brooklyn, New York. See more about Tatiana at tatianagray.com. Abra Stafford-Mead loves optimistic science fiction, cheerful horror, and dark fantasy. Dozens of her short stories have appeared at publications including Tor.com, FNSF, Escape Pod, and Odyssey Magazine. She lives in Minneapolis, where she wrangles her children, pets, and the mad scientist she keeps in the attic. When not writing or wrangling, she collects folktales and photographs whatever stands still long enough to allow it. Her most recent book, The Unkindness of Ravens, is an epic fantasy coming-of-age novella about trickster gods and favors owed. Now, get ready for fake dating drama that leads to real problems, because it's story time.
To Catch a Flieff by Julia Rios. Alessia. 3 days later, Alessia sipped tea by the circuit board, Mr. Tumnus purring on her lap. Things were going more smoothly than she might have feared. Too smoothly, if Alessia was being honest. Darmanda was possibly the most considerate person she'd ever met, making sure to nap while Alessia was out and let her have the room and bed to herself when she came off shift. She even took care to exercise Fiona and tire her out, so she'd be quiet in her case while Alessia slept. And while Alessia was sure Arctic Flieffs must produce bodily waste, she'd never seen any evidence of that in her quarters. It was almost as convenient as living alone had been. Alessia and Darmanda made a point of meeting up for meals at least once a day in the mess, for appearances. They'd sit next to each other, and sometimes Alessia would wrap one of Darmanda's thick black curls around her finger, or lay her head on Darmanda's shoulder. Other times, Darmanda would rest a soft brown hand on Alessia's knee. Gestures of affection they'd specifically discussed and given consent for in their initial negotiations talk, all designed to make them seem like a proper couple who were comfortable together. It really was comfortable, and it was killing her. Truth be told, it had been too long since she had a girlfriend. It would be nice to have a real date for Mizentide. She had missed the way the rhythms of daily life changed when you had a partner, and the chemical boosts that came from physical contact. She wanted more of it, which was preposterous, since she didn't actually know Darmanda at all, and they were definitely going to part ways and never see each other again when they docked on Vorpa in 4 days. Ugh, "Mr. Tumnus, I'm a mess," she said. Mr. Tumnus continued purring. "I'll take that as a sign of agreement." The door chimed then, and Mr. Tumnus jumped down, stretching his back legs out as he walked over to investigate, while Alessia pushed the button to let her extremely fake and not real at all girlfriend in. "It's just Darmanda coming to collect me for lunch," she told the cat. "You know this." Mr. Tumnus sniffed delicately and twined about Darmanda's legs the second the door opened. Darmanda crouched low and scooped the cat into her arms, cradling him against her chest as she stood. "Hello, kitty," she said. "Busy work day?" Mr. Tumnus answered by butting his fluffy orange head against Darmanda's chin. "Yes," Darmanda cooed, "such a hard worker. You've earned many scritches." When he felt sufficiently adored, Mr. Tumnus leapt down and found a corner in which to bathe himself. "Ready for lunch?" Darmanda asked. "Just a sec," Alessia said without looking up. She made a few micro-adjustments to the engine settings that were absolutely unnecessary, but at least they gave her something to do with her hands while she tried to pull herself together and not look as obviously into Darmanda as she felt. When she finally turned around and stood up, she kept her face neutral. Which was hard, because Darmanda looked even more adorable than usual. She'd been helping Ken Val in the galley again, and there were streaks of flour in her hair, which was piled up in a loose knot. The coverall she'd borrowed from Alessia had a scorch mark on one arm that hadn't been there before, and her skin was glowing in that way that spending the morning in a steamy kitchen made skin glow. She smelled of mint and Crivlanian peppergrass, comfort food smells. Alessia wanted to burrow into her the way Mr. Tumnus had a moment before. She had to focus on something else. Literally anything else. "Are we having dumplings? Please say yes." "Your wish is my command," said Darmanda, laughing, and then they walked out into the hallway, hand in hand. It felt way too right. "You know, we don't need to hold hands until we get out of the lift, really, if you don't want to," Alessia said. "It's good to be prepared, though, don't you think?" Darmanda countered. Did Darmanda want more, too? Alessia couldn't help wondering, but she also couldn't bring herself to ask. Instead, she blurted, "What are you going to do when we dock?" Darmanda stiffened, and their easy connection turned awkward in an instant. "I'll be out of your hair as soon as we touch land. You won't have to deal with me anymore." She sounded small and sad, like someone who had been devalued and pushed away by the people she loved over and over. Who had hurt this beautiful woman so badly? And how could Alessia make it better? "I didn't mean it like that," Alessia said. "So, what did you mean?" Darmanda asked. The words were sharp and clipped, and she slid her hand out of Alessia's and hunched her shoulders as though they were a shield around her. "Just that it's Mizentide. It's a time when everyone's got family stuff going on, especially on an outpost planet like Vorpa. You shouldn't be stranded without a place to stay. So you're thinking of bringing me home to Mama after all?" Sarcasm, of course, and Alessia wished that didn't bother her so much. But Darmanda was right. It was outlandish to think Alessia might really want to bring a stranger home after 3 days of fake dating. And even more outlandish to think that stranger would want to come. So she backtracked, even though, yes, that was exactly what she had been starting to suggest. "No, of course not. I can help you find a hotel and stuff if you need it. Or a guide to take you and Fiona up to Vorpalix, I guess." "Oh, right," Darmanda said. She no longer sounded sarcastic, but she still seemed shrunken into an invisible shell. So that had gone well.
Darmanda. It was the 6th day, when everything fell apart. Darmanda knew she was on borrowed time, but even with a few bumps here and there, the week had flown by, and she'd felt something closer to true happiness here than she'd ever felt at home. Ken Val and the gallery crew actually seemed to like having her around, whether she was helping or just playing cards in the downtime between meal prep rushes. Alicia had been more generous with the resources she had, sharing everything from her quarters to her clothes. On the 4th night, she'd even shared her bed, when Darmanda had come back earlier than usual from the galley. She'd started her shift early and was exhausted from kneading dough for hours to make the special mizzen loaf that needed 7 separate rise cycles in one long day. Darmanda's aching arms were a clear indication of why it was only ever made at the holiday. She'd planned to set up a sleep sack on the floor next to Fiona, but Alicia had taken one look at her and lifted her covers. "Come on," she said. "You look dead on your feet." They'd spooned as they slept, because there was no room to do anything less intimate, and just like that first day in the jump seat, being held by Alicia felt right. Darmanda had tried to remind herself that it was out of necessity and not desire on Alicia's part, but it didn't stop her from feeling safe and warm and getting the best sleep she had had for as long as she could remember. Of course, when she woke, Alicia had already gone, and their sleep schedules didn't coincide again. Still, they'd been easy with each other when they did meet, with no repeats of that mortifying time when Alicia had tried to be nice to her out of pity, and Darmanda had misread it and been a jerk. They'd settled it okay in the end. Alicia had made some joke about inviting Darmanda home for real, and Darmanda had at least had the presence of mind to keep it to herself that she'd actually been fantasizing about that in a cheesy rom-com vid kind of way. Of course, Alicia hadn't meant it. She'd just been trying to help Darmanda with logistics in a very practical way because she was A, an engineer, and B, just generally decent to everyone. That was all. Anyway, one more day and they'd dock on Vorpa, and then, well, Darmanda didn't know what then, but at least she'd have a little credit for her galley work, which Kenval insisted she take regular pay rate for. Alicia was right about Kenval being the biggest gossip on the ship, but they were also kind. They could sense others' moods, and they used that power to make everyone feel at ease and valued. Everyone in the galley was kind too, it seemed. It was so different than home. Which was why it came as such a shock when the captain visited. The shift started off well enough. They handled the dinner rush and then took out the mizzen loaf, which had rested for a day after baking and was now ready to be decorated. Darmanda took glazing duty, while Kenval worked on herb designs with 2 of the other galley crew. Then came the surprise inspection. First came an announcement over the PA system from Manny in the meal service bay. "Attention galley crew," he said. "Captain incoming, I repeat, captain incoming. This is not a drill, it's mizzen-tide inspection time." The galley crew cheered, and Kenval, picking up on Darmanda's confusion, said, "It's an annual tradition. Every year on the last day we have a mizzen-tide banquet. That's what the loaf is for, but we can't have it until the captain inspects the galley and declares it an official holiday." "Oh." Darmanda stood straighter and adjusted the drape of her coverall in an attempt to look more formal. "Do I need to do anything special?" Kenval laughed. "Nah, it's all in fun. The captain knows we run a tight ship. Just be ready to let them sample the glaze. The captain loves mizzen loaf glaze." "I can do that," Darmanda said, and since everyone else seemed happy and relaxed, she began to relax again herself. Then the captain walked in. "Oh, snap," Darmanda hissed. The captain was the furry giant who had knocked her down in port. There was no mistaking it. The captain was at least 8 feet tall and covered in golden fur, with a sunset-colored feather crest atop their head. "Maybe they won't notice me," Darmanda thought. "Maybe they won't remember." That turned out to be wishful thinking, because the second the captain looked in her direction, they let out a long, low growl, followed by a series of grunts and trills, which the translator of Darmanda's watch helpfully interpreted. You insulted us on the dock, and you are wanted for theft of a protected animal. Why are you aboard the Astral Dancer? Our ship does not harbor thieves." Kenval's feelers undulated wildly, turning a green so bright it was almost yellow. They turned their eye stalks towards Darmanda. "Theft? Girl, have you been holding out on me?" Their feelers quivered. "You have. But this story is not quite right, so what is the real story?" "I can explain," Darmanda said, though she knew deep down that she couldn't, actually, when it came down to it. But maybe if she stalled enough, a good cover story would present itself. The captain stomped one furry foot and grunt trilled, "You will explain! To the interplanetary trade enforcers!" Then they turned to their lieutenant. "You! Take this human to the brig! Immediately!" Darmonda sat forlornly on a hard gray bench in a small gray cell. There was occasional chatter outside, but they had taken her watch, so she couldn't understand anyone unless they spoke her primary language, which apparently most of the crew here didn't. The last exchange she had understood was when Kenval had called out to her as she was being taken away. "I'll tell Alicia, girl, don't you fret!" "Alicia?" the captain had growled. "Our engineer? What has she got to do with this criminal?" Darmonda had groaned and lowered her head. She would have face-palmed, but her arms were restrained for her perp walk to the brig. The lieutenant had handed her over to a clerk, who'd processed her temporary incarceration without talking directly to her. He took her watch, scanned for any other devices, and put her into the holding cell. And there she'd been ever since. Once again, it seemed that Darmonda had messed up her life. And this time, it was worse than failing her exams. This time, she'd managed to mess up someone else's life, too. Alicia would probably lose her job, and maybe even end up in prison, all because she had agreed to help Darmonda. She didn't know how long she sat there contemplating her mistakes and imagining dire possible futures. Life imprisonment, being sentenced to work on a mining colony, or, perhaps the worst fate, being sent back to her parents for house arrest and community service as a face of crime to scare children into being better than she was. She was so absorbed in that last horrific daydream that she flinched when the buzzer sounded and her cell door opened. Her heart leapt with joyful recognition and then plummeted into despair when she saw Alicia standing there. "They got you too! I'm so sorry!" Alicia stepped forward and pulled Darmonda into an embrace. "Shh, it's okay," she said loud enough so that the clerk, the captain, and Kenval, who was also there for some reason, could hear. And then she brushed her lips over Darmonda's cheek and whispered into her ear, "Just go with it. Let me do the talking." Darmonda didn't have time to process this before Alicia continued. "I'm the one who should be sorry, sweetie," Alicia said. "But I've explained now. Kenval told them you were my girlfriend, and they came to get me. I let them know about the wrongfully captured Arctic Flieff you had rescued from an unsanctioned breeder, and how you were planning to present her to the captain at the Mizentide banquet so that they and their family could deliver her personally to the Rewilding Committee in Vorpalix. I think the captain wants to speak to you about that, actually." The captain nodded at the clerk, who handed Darmonda her watch. When Darmonda had snapped it into place and activated the translator, the captain cleared their throat and began a dramatic sequence of grunts and trills, accompanied by grandiose arm gestures. "We are still angry that you insulted us in port. However, we are willing to forgive this, as we understand that you were concerned at the time for your precious cargo, the honored animal. Furthermore, we know now that you did not know who we were, and we are assured by our engineer, Alicia, that you would have shown proper respect and deference if you had, and that you were in fact bringing the animal specifically to us because you understood our position would provide the utmost wisdom on the rewilding process. Is this correct? And Kenval will verify." Darmonda stared blankly, unable to wrap her head around that whole speech. The formality, the audacious pride. She almost wanted to laugh. Alicia nudged her subtly in the ribs, and she coughed instead. Kenval would verify? That meant they must be there as a living lie detector test? Right. Yes, that is all correct. I was very worried for the wrongfully captured Arctic Flieff. She's a member of a protected species, and I wanted to be sure she was in good health prior to her rewilding. All of that was true, at least, Darmonda thought, and from the way Kenval nodded at the captain, they could sense it, too. "And?" the captain asked in a low growl. Darmonda looked in confusion at Kenval, whose eye stalks were stretched as high as they could go, a sign she understood to mean that something more was expected of her right now. But what? It was Alicia who came to her rescue, again. "You are extremely sorry about the insult, right?" "Oh," Darmonda said. "Yes, of course. I'm terribly sorry. I should not have done that." "You must tell us what we are certainly not. And to honor us, you must tell us what we are," the captain grunted. "I must... what?" Darmonda looked at Alicia in desperation. "Help?" "You have to do the formal Vorpin apology," Alicia said, as if it should be obvious. "Which is..." "Oh, right," Alicia said. "I forgot you've never been and didn't grow up with it. You have to say you're sorry, and the captain is not whatever you said they were, and that they are something much better. And you'd better make it really good, because they are not happy," Kenval added. Darmonda drew in a deep breath. "I'm sorry I insulted you. You are definitely not a big oaf." She tried to say it quietly, but everyone heard anyway, and Kenval gasped. "Girl, you did not!" Darmonda cleared her throat. "So, I'm sorry for that. And actually, you are a tall and confident captain," Alicia nodded and gestured her to keep going, "who, shows great wisdom," another nudge in her ribs. How much more did she need to say? "And cares deeply for animals?" "Is it a question, or do you believe us to be caring?" the captain asked. And even though Darmonda didn't understand Vorpin, she understood the seething tone of their trills. "It's not a question," she amended. "You are a courageous and caring captain who is a friend to animals and beloved by their crew." Kenval whistled appreciatively. "Good save," they said. "And I can sense that you mean it." "Does it suffice?" Alicia asked the captain. "It suffices," the captain grunted. Then they clapped Darmonda on the back with one massive furry forepaw. "You are officially welcome aboard the Astral Dancer as our honored guest. Now, we will discuss how to prosecute and punish this unsanctioned breeder."
Alessia. A few hours later, Alessia and Darmonda were back in Alessia's quarters, preparing to attend the Mizentide banquet. "I think I'll wear my planet-side clothes for this," Darmonda said. "It's a special occasion, after all." "Just as long as we don't have to chase down Fiona while you're wearing those ridiculous shoes," Alessia said. "You should be nice about them," Darmonda said. "You're pretending to be head over heels for me, remember?" Alessia flushed. "Pretending, right?" "What is it?" Darmonda asked. Alessia's heart pounded. Was she really thinking about saying this? Yeah, it seemed she was. What if we weren't pretending? Darmonda dropped the bundle of clothes she'd pulled from the shelf. "What do you mean?" Alessia wished she could read the tone better, but Darmonda was too guarded. Well, she was either going to take the chance and possibly get to bring a real date home for Mizentide, or chicken out and wonder forever about whether it could have worked. And besides, if it didn't, she could drink a bunch of wine at the banquet, sleep it off overnight, and then never have to see this woman she was pretending to be head over heels for ever again. Which would be awful. But it would be worse if she didn't ask. "I mean, I really like you, Darmonda. I think we could be a good couple. If you want to try." There was a horrible pause, during which Alessia thought maybe she had made a huge mistake. Darmonda stared at her like she was trying to calculate something in her head. The best way to let Alessia down gently, perhaps? But then she took a step towards Alessia, and since the room was so small, that meant they were practically touching. "Do you mean it?" Darmonda asked. Alessia nodded. "What if we're not compatible? You barely know me." "I feel like I've known you forever, in a way," Alessia said. "I know that's weird, but it just feels right to be with you." "Right. Yeah, I get that," Darmonda said. "Should we try kissing? Just to check?" Alessia moved a half step closer, so they were no longer almost touching. She traced her hand over Darmanda's round cheek and then fisted it in Darmanda's glorious curls. Their mouths met, tentatively, with just lips first, then tongues teasing and dancing. It was better than Alessia had imagined, and she had imagined it would be really good. She moaned softly and pulled Darmanda hard up against her, reveling in the feel of her body. Darmanda lifted one leg and hooked it around Alessia's waist, straining to get closer. It was everything. Alessia staggered a little as she attempted to meld completely with Darmanda, and there was an exasperated string of chitters and woofs from Fiona's case, which it turned out she'd nearly stepped into. Oops. Reluctantly, they broke the kiss and moved apart. "I don't think we're incompatible," Alessia said. "No," Darmanda agreed. "We're definitely not incompatible."
Darmanda. The mess was packed for the banquet. Everyone was there, even Mr. Tumnus, who had a special cat feast all to himself at ground level. All the rest of the foods were laid out along the service bay, buffet style, and the mizzen loaf was the centerpiece of the head table. Now that Darmanda had been cleared of thievery charges and insulting the captain, she and Alicia were invited to dine at the head table, along with Kenval and the rest of the galley crew. The Mizzen-tide banquet was the galley's big show, so they were traditionally honored during the celebration. After due consideration by all parties, they decided the best course of action for Fiona would be to leave her in Alicia's quarters until the astral dancer had docked. No need to risk another bout of fluffy mayhem in the banquet hall. It was a night of feasting and merriment, with many toasts to the astral dancer as a whole and to every person aboard it individually. When it came time for her to make a toast, she raised her glass high and said, "To Kenval, who welcomed me into the galley with warmth and friendship." "To Kenval," everyone echoed. "And to Alicia, who takes us all exactly where we need to go and who is worth far more than her weight in gold." "Alicia!" Glasses clinked. Wine was sipped. Then Kenval said slyly, "My dear Darmanda, what a delicious toast. Would you say Alicia is worth her weight in cheese?" "Kenval, I will get you back for this," Alicia sputtered. But she was laughing. She didn't really sound angry. Darmanda set her glass down in confusion. "Will someone please explain what in the multiverse this whole cheese thing is about?" "It was one time," Alicia said. "Anyone could have made the same mistake." "Anyone could have, but you did," said Kenval. "Not such a terrible mistake," the captain trilled. "We had many delicious dairy-based meals because of Alicia. Also, we made sure to hire a proper bursar after that, which was a good choice for our ship." Darmanda looked from Alicia to Kenval to the captain and then back to Alicia. "I still don't understand." "I'm an engineer, okay? That's the first thing to know. Not a bursar, not a banker, certainly not a cheesemonger." "She's right that anyone could have made the same mistake," Kenval added. "I once ordered an inexpensive amber and got lager instead of a precious gem." "So what happened?" Darmanda asked. "It was my first multi-jump trip, and we had to clear out of a floating station in a very limited window," Alicia said. "I was worried about port jams and the possibility of getting slammed by the next scheduled ship to jump in." "Very reasonable to fear this. Our engineer has a good head for practical concerns," said the captain. "So I decided to hurry through the payment for our trade drop. The buyer offered to pay in gold, which I assumed was a good deal." "Yes?" Darmanda asked, afraid she knew where this was going. "And then the 11 crates of golden cheddar arrived at the dock," Alicia said. She laughed so hard then that she snorted. "Oh, snap," Darmanda said. "That is a lot of cheddar. Couldn't you return it?" "No time," said Alicia. "Plus, I had signed the trade agreement with the full authority of the astral dancer. It's hard to go back on that kind of commitment." "What did you do with it all?" Well, we didn't have room in the galley, so we had to line the subdeck corridors with cheese crates," Kenval said. "It was a sweet workout, though," Manny chimed in. "Lots of squats and lifts. Good CrossFit." The look on Alicia's face when she saw those crates. Canval said, cackling. What I remember best was the captain trying to make me feel better, Alicia said between guffaws. Yes, Alicia, we do enjoy cheese. Perhaps we will have a souffle or 200. That will be pleasant. Everyone roared at that, and Alicia raised her glass. To cheese! 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 Cried the banqueters. And after they drank, Alicia rested her head on Darmanda's shoulder, like they'd practiced so many times this week. But this time, it wasn't for show. Before long, they went back to Alicia's quarters and fell into the one bed together. When Alicia took the part of Big Spoon and encircled Darmanda in her arms, it wasn't just to save space. Definitely not incompatible, Darmanda murmured as she drifted off to sleep. From her case in the corner, Fiona whuffed a sigh of agreement.
Once again, that was part 2 of To Catch a Flieff by Julia Rios. One of the most relatable parts of a romance, to me, is the uncertainty that arises from an embarrassed refusal to communicate. We can just ask how someone feels, what they're thinking, but all too often we're afraid of the answers to those questions, afraid that they might lead to rejection. Instead, we look for hints and clues, reading the tea leaves of a smile or a particular turn of phrase. In this story, the difficulty level is increased because the characters are supposed to be faking all those signs that indicate interest and affection, leading to extra confusion and doubt. As it turns out, using one's words clearly and directly solves not only the problem with the captain that could have ended very badly, it ultimately allows the fake relationship to become a real one. A happily ever after that ends, dare I say it, in the cheesiest way possible. Delicious. Escape Pod is part of the Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Don't change it, don't sell it. Please do share it. If you'd like to support Escape Pod, please rate or review us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite app. We are 100% audience supported, and we count on your donations to keep the lights on and the servers humming. You can now donate via 4 different platforms. On Patreon and Ko-fi, search for Escape Artists. On Twitch and YouTube, we're at EA Podcasts. You can also use PayPal through our website, escapepod.org. Patreon subscribers have access to exclusive merchandise and can be automatically added to our Discord, where they can chat with other fans as well as our staff members. Our opening and closing music is by Daikaiju at daikaiju.org. And our closing quotation this week is from Gabby Rivera, who said, "To love another woman is to look at yourself in the mirror and determine that you are worthy of the galaxy and its fury." Thanks for joining us, and may your escape pod be fully stocked with stories.